What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here today, and we're doing Revonn Ripples. So this is actually a really cool deck. Off the back, we thought that Revonn only works in standard. We didn't think it would be a decent or viable deck in premium. But luckily, we have something called the Ripple Engine, and so with that complementing its playstyle, it actually plays really well, and they both complement each other. And so I thought I'd show it off, and actually some of the combos that I've discovered, and just some of the pros and cons between it too as well. So let's get right into it. So first off, I'm going to start with the grade 3s. I'm going to explain the lineup and then also explain the interaction between Galeas and Odysseus as well. So we're actually playing 4 copies of Revonn, and so what he does is that basically you can rest one of your rear guards, minus 5k your opponent's Vanguard for the rest of the turn, and then his second skill is that when he attacks, you can actually, if you see 5 or more rested rear guards, you get an extra drive check plus 15k, and then if you have a grade 3 in the soul, you get a plus crit, and so he becomes basically a stride. Especially on your first grade 3 ride, so that's very cool. And one of the pros for Revonn in standard is that he has a very solid first grade 3 turn. And so the synergy between the Revonn support in itself is just really phenomenal. And so taking advantage of that is key in this deck as well. And what complements it is the Ripple grade 3s, for example. So which goes into Miltiades and Genovias. And so for those of that know, Miltiades is basically the Legion leader of Genovias. And so what the Legion leader does is that 21k Legion skill, return the 4 cards in the drop zone into the deck, seek the mate, and perform Legion. The real skill is basically when this Vanguard attacks and it's Legioned, if you have 3 or more rested units, you can actually choose one of your regards, stand it, countercharge, and then if you have 3 units in the back row that are also rested, you may draw a card as well. So it's actually really good because what it does, it complements Genovias' skill. And so it goes into what his skill is. His limit break 4, counterblast 2, discard a copy of himself. And then if the number of cards rested are 3 exactly, you may stand all your regards. And so we only play 1 copy of Genovia, so we don't really care about his skill. He's actually part of the right chan too, the original. But what we care about is Miltiades' skill. We want to perform Legion, and because on attack, he can restand a unit. And so that gives us a way to abuse cards like Coral Assault and go along with Galeas as well. And I'll explain that a little bit more too in deep with that. And then of course, countercharging is very helpful too. So you can do turns with 1 or 2 counterblasts and he just makes things happen a lot easier. In fact, you can manipulate the same counterblast, so that helps with that timing as well. And so complementing together, so what does this mean? So basically, thanks to Odysseus over here, Odysseus, his skill, once per turn, choose one of your other rear guards, put it into soul, search your deck up to 1 Ripple in its card name, and you may write it as your Vanguard as the same grade. And then if you did, you can pull out a unit with the same grade out to a rear guard, and it gets plus 2k for the end of the turn. And so what he does, he's supposed to keep the right chain intact as you go up to grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. But because he's able to do this during the main phase, there are benefits to it. And so one benefit is that with Revonn, you can shove a grade 3 into the soul, get that crit on first grade 3 ride while your opponent's at grade 2. So if you do his skill, your opponent, since he or she is at grade 2, they can go down as low as 4k or even 5k, depending on what base their Vanguard is. And so you take advantage of that, and sometimes that crit can mean the difference of a game too. However, if it's your first grade 3 ride turn, and you have the option to get first stride, you can actually perform a Legion turn instead. So basically what you do is that you have Revonn skill, you ride, get the Excel2 circle, draw a card, do his skill, rest their rear guard, minus 5k their Vanguard, and with Odysseus, you can use that same rested rear guard and shove it into soul, get Miltiades, ride it, call out the Revonn to rear guard, it's a 14k beater now, and then with Miltiades, you can actually do the skill, oh yeah, forgot about that skill. Is basically on place, you can counterblast, check the top 3 cards, you may add up to 1 Ripple from them to your hand, and then send the rest of the drop zone. So that helps with actually performing the Legion if you were short on some cards too. And with that, you're able to deck them. Then you return all the triggers that you have and any combo pieces that you care about into the deck, perform Legion, seek the mate, and now what you have is Revonn skill, the minus 5k on the opponent's Vanguard, you have a Legion, and because you're also grade 3, you have access to Galeas too as well. So Galeas is basically has the restriction where if your grade 3 Vanguard attacks and your opponent's power is different from its original, you can counterblast in standard. And so you can actually meet the requirements and take advantage of Gallios too in this turn. And so it actually performs a really powerful turn. And because of the XL2 circle, now you have another unit that you can actually perform attacks with while filling your columns and do an effective turn as well. So that's really the prime interaction. And honestly, most of the time I go into this play if I have the Revonn and then go into the Legion turn with Odysseus, then instead of going to first stride. And it's a powerhouse difference, especially if you have the right field setup or any formation that just complements that turn as well. So let's go into basically the grade zeros, then go into the grade ones and grade twos just to show that progression from the early game and up to this point. All right, let's go. On to the grade zeros. So with our starter, I actually chose the on ride draw card. We also get the errata that we get the quick shield ticket too, so that's extra shield. So honestly, drawing a combo piece rather than using the Ripple starter just to help guarantee the ride chain, this skill is much more valuable. And on top of that, you get extra 5k shield that you can work with. What I've been doing too is that some cards you're able to filter, so you basically can grab a deck. You can grab a card from deck and actually discard a card, and so depending on what your hand looks like, you can even discard that ticket shield. It's just an extra fodder to play with to your advantage at that point. So that's why I definitely recommend still playing the on ride draw 1 card starter, and it's just been phenomenal because you want to make sure you have Revonn as your grade 3 ride too, and that really makes your power plays and also generate the Excel circles that you care about, and just go from there. So the triggers, how do I explain this? So Ripples over a year ago came out with a 16 crit version. This is back before V era. That deck was really good, especially the crit ratio to card guarding, and then also hidden magic numbers and restanders like the OG title really taking advantage of that. However, this build's slightly different. We use the V series title, so there's no real restander that takes advantage of crits. The build is actually geared to take advantage of the units on board and do as many as attacks and just kind of like hit face, and of course minusing your opponent's Vanguard just to make hitting thresholds a lot easier as well, while maintaining an advantage with cards like Coral Assault and Narissa. And what I found myself, because of Coral Assault, Narissa, and the extra drive check, if you didn't really finish your opponent during your turns, you would draw cards basically. And honestly, drawing a heal or a draw PG, the value in drawing those cards are significantly higher than just drawing a 15k shield crit trigger. And that's what I found myself coming up shorts in CFA playing and all that stuff. There are games that I just lost because I came up short, or they have a 6 heal damage, and at this point it's just like I don't really have anything to defend myself. And if I didn't really have a great early game, I was at a higher damage, and at that point I would just lose. So that's basically what I went through. And I went back to this close, it's almost a 4-8 ratio. But because we have an early game, thanks to the Ripples and then the complementary grade 3 Revonn turn, I honestly didn't want a heal trigger to show up on my drive checks or even my damage checks, because most of the time my opponent would be at a higher damage. And so I remove a 4th heal trigger to go down to 3, and then just up an extra crit essentially. So that way I have the 9 crit, the 3 heal, but still maintain the 4 PG draw. So that way if we draw into these cards, we can still actually just perfect guard and G guard. And that's something that I will highlight in the G zone as well. And so that's pretty much it for the grade zeros. On to the grade 1s. We are playing 13 grade 1s. One of the nice things about the grade 3 lineup, there's only 7 grade 3s, so we have more room in the grade 1s and grade 2s to play with. It's also fitting because we are playing the Ripple engine. And so, like I mentioned with the Odysseus, shove something into Soul, ride the same grade, call something, give it 2k. And again, its original purpose is to fix the ride chain, which you still want because we have Sotorio from the original ride chain. And honestly, he's a vanilla at this point, but he's just another card with Ripple in the name. And he's the only grade 1 besides Odysseus that we have access to. So yeah, Sotorio came in the first wave of support of Ripples in general, and Odysseus came in the second support. And after that, Bushiroad decided not to make any more because of Worlds 2015. So yeah, anyway. So basically, with Sotorio, it's basically just another card in the Ripple name. And really what you're doing is deck thinning with Odysseus, and also you're +1ing in the Soul. So there are cards that use Soul, for example, is the V title and even Narissa. So that actually is worth value on top of that. And then, of course, if you really need to, you can shove that grade 3 just to get the plus crit on Revonn if you go grade 3 first. Or you just fix into this ultimate Revonn Legion turn per se. And so A tip that I do, if you see two copies, especially starting off at grade 1, when you write a card like Narissa and Baragios, you can use the first Odysseus, shove something, write another copy of Odysseus, and just pull out the Baragios and Narissa. And then your second copy that you have on rearguard, you can actually shove that same Narissa or Baragios back into the soul and write Satorio, and then you pull back out the Baragios or Narissa. Odysseus has a restriction where it cannot pull itself from soul, but you can actually grab it from deck and write it. And so that was one of the little things that you can do to help deck in an extra card on top of your grade 1 turn. So yeah. Anyway, going into Baragios and Narissa. Now, Baragios has an amazing synergy with this deck that I honestly didn't realize until I started playing. And so, first off, his first go is during your turn. If you have 4 or more rested rearguards, counts himself. He gets plus 5k. So he's a great 13k booster or attacker. The second skill is really what shines, is that when he's placed from hand, keynote from hand, so you can't do the Odysseus spam and get another filter. I tried that before and I realized, oh, can't do that. So it has to be from hand. Check the top 5 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 grade 3, add it to your hand, and if you did, discard a card. And so what honestly he brings to the table is more deck thinning. On top of that, he's also searching for your Revonn ride, which helps the consistency of actually riding the right grade 3. So that way you can get the Excel circle, and of course it's Revonn himself. And what I noticed is that you can discard cards like Genovia's, or you can discard other useless cards, and then so that way when you do your drive checks and your damage checks, it actually provides more value because you're more than likely hit triggers at that point. And then you build up your drop zone too, so that way you don't have to use that counterblast from Antiatis to build up a drop zone and actually perform Legion at that point. So that's another thing that I noticed. And then at the same time, what's really cool is that because during your main phase you can do the skill, sometimes getting the grade 3 that you need and then shoving it into Soul can be a play, or just discarding it and just build up the Legion turn as well. Because what's kind of cool, you Thekton a Genovia's and put it in the drop, and then you can grab it from the drop because it's the Legion mate per se. So it's just really good synergy at that point. It honestly is great boosting for rearguard columns and vanguard columns, so he's just great overall. So Narissa. Narissa is part of the Revonn support, so when it's rested by a card's ability, Soul Blast 1, stand this unit, it gets 10k to the end of the turn. It's not once per turn, but again, we only have Revonn that does this, so she's only going to get procced once. And honestly, it's a great unit to boost or even attack with. It's an 18k. If your opponent's a Force Vanguard, they get down to 8k because of -5. It actually hits by itself, or it hits a 15k threshold on herself. And then, of course, if you have a boost if you have it as a booster, then you can just proc more shield value from them as well. And what I really like about it is that at the end of your turn, if you have 4 or more rested rearguards, you can put this into your soul and draw a card. And that builds soul. It replenishes itself once you start using its cost to restand itself, and you draw a card. And that's where the real value of drawing a PG, a combo piece, or a heal trigger just shines more in this deck. And honestly, it's one of the best cards to maintain advantage while you're committing a full board to do Revonn in general, especially if you do that grade 3 turn. You have to commit a lot more, but with the Legion turn, you can also commit a full board just to become like a more effective Legion turn. And then at the end of the turn, you shove cards like Narissa and Coroso and get advantage back, and your hand size is actually pretty healthy, and it's just phenomenal. On to the grade 2s now. So we are playing 13 grade 2s as well. We are playing the 4 Galeas. Galeas is useful. His first skill is basically if you have 4 or more rested rearguards, he gets +5. He also counts himself. So on an Excel 2 circle, he can easily become a 19k beater by himself. And of course, his second ability, when your grade 3 Vanguard attacks, if your opponent's Vanguard's power is different from the original, Counterblast 1, restand this unit. And so you can abuse that on the Excel 2 circle or in any other front row circle. So he's your restander with Revonn. And then of course, like I explained, with the interaction with the Revonn skill onto Legion play, he's active on that play as well. So you can actually utilize, and you can actually get a pretty average of 5 attacks, and then you can up it depending on the number of Galeas that you have to like 6-7 attacks, essentially. With Pavrov, basically he's part of the right train. Again, he's there to Thekton for Odysseus to go off on your grade 2 turn. And honestly, if you have the grade 1 Ripple Satorio, which he actually becomes useful in this case, he becomes a 10k base. And so he actually provides some early defense and can actually hit force grade 2s that are 10k base as well. And so that's actually pretty cool. And then his on-hit skill, of course, if you have Satorio in your soul, you can choose one of your Rearguard standard and plus 3k it if you actually hit the Vanguard. So it's an on-hit skill that you can restand a unit, or you just give something an extra 3k that can beat a number threshold essentially. So onto Tidal Assault and Coral Assault. V Tidal is actually really nice in this deck. It gives you an early game to play with, and so when he attacks Soul Blast 1, stand this unit, and if it's the second battle or more, it loses 5k. So you really want him to be that first wave. He also takes advantage of being 14k on the XL2 circle. So if your opponent's at 8k or 7k or even 6k, they have to drop a 10k guard to actually guard this attack. And if they take a damage and they still didn't have a damage trigger, then you attack again and it's another actual 10k shield they have to compensate for, basically. So Coral Assault is very good in this build too. So during the battle that it attack, if you have 4 or more of your other units that are rested, which includes Vanguard, this gets 15k. So it's a beater, and at the same time, at the end of your turn, if the total number of attacks is 4 or more, you can put it into Soul and draw a card. And that's what I was talking about, where you can use this card to commit to the board and build back your hand with maintaining advantage. What's really nice in the early game, if you grade 2 turn, if you ride Tidal Assault and you fix your ride with an Odysseus, you can have Pavrov now become the Vanguard, call out Tidal Assault, and Tidal Assault becomes 11k. And then if you have to complement the Coral Assault with it, if you call Rearguards like Baragios, you already have Odysseus on board, or even Narissa, then you can actually meet the 15k requirement. But thanks to being Tidal Assault on the grade 2 turn, you can proc basically the number of battles is 4 or more, so you can put them into Soul and draw a card and hope get to Revonn and any other combo pieces that are useful. And he removes himself, so the only front row unit is Tidal Assault at that point, and not 2 Rearguards too. So that's actually very key. And honestly, like I said, you can commit to a grade 2 almost full board and take advantage of Baragios, Narissa, and Coral Assault, and get basically the advantage back via Narissa and Coral Assault. So it really works well. And then you draw into cards onto your grade 3 turn like a Galeas or Baragios or some other units that you can play with, and just go from there. So I figured I'd give an example of how this Revonn Legion turn looks like. Again, there's multiple ways to build formations. This is just one that I just literally built on the spot. So basically on your grade 3 right turn, you ride Revonn, you get the XL2 circle, you can plop out Galeas there. If you have these boosters, honestly, Odysseus can be there from the early game, Baragios too, especially if you did the whole grade 1 Ripple fixed ride chain too. Narissa and Coral Assault, and so this can be in anything. And so what you can do is basically use Revonn skill first. You would rest the Narissa to Soul Blast, so that way you can actually restand it and give it an 18. It becomes 18k boosted at that point. So at this point, now that you did the minus 5k, you can use Odysseus skill, shove this unit into Soul, and then of course you would ride the Matiatis, and then shove the same unit out of the grade to a rearguard circle. So Revonn becomes a rearguard at 14k because you got the plus 2k. You can do Matiatis skill if you can't. In this example, I have used the counterblast, so I'm going to show you an interaction that you can take advantage with too. So then at this point, you can just set up your board if you haven't set it up yet, and then Legion. So once you Legion, you can seek the mate, try to make room, basically. There we go. That's a little more better. So Legion. So you're Legion right now, and so really you could do an attack pattern that basically goes like with Galeas first, or even Revonn, depending on how you want to do this. For me, in this purpose, I'm going to restand the Coral Assault. So in this example, I'm going to attack with Galeas first. He's 14k. If they take a damage trigger, that's fine, whatever. And at this point, then my next attack would be the Revonn, boosted by the Narissa. Now, if Narissa didn't have the 10k power up, this would be 8 plus 14, which makes 22k. So it already hits the damage trigger if they got one. But in this case, it's a plus 10, so it's a 32k column, which is humongous. So then the next follow-up attack for the third wave, you boost with this. So that way, Coral Assault can see 4 other rested units to get the plus 15k. So this becomes 60k column plus 15, a 31k column. And then, of course, you can do the attack. Now, on attack, you have this skill and Galeas' skill and proc. And in this case, I'm going to do Miltiades first. So I'm going to restand Coral Assault, countercharge, and then I would just draw one. So let's say I just drew this, right? And then Gallia's skill, Counterblast. So I'm using the same Counterblast that I just CC'd, and now I get to use it to restand Gallias. So right now it has been 1, 2, 3, and this is the 4th battle. What's his name? Baragios. Wow, I almost forgot his name. Baragios sees 4 rested regards, so he's a 13k booster. So 21 plus 13 is 34. Really big number. Twin drive. You do your twin drive, apply triggers. If you have like double crit, I would split them. That's just how I do it. Because none of these are like restanding. These are just one more attack. So if you split the crits, that it's just both attacks are deadly at that point. And so in this case, if they're, let's say they hit a damage trigger and they're basically 18k at the most, you can do Gallias. And at this point, he can see 4 more rested rearguards, so he gets an additional 5k. So it becomes a 19k attack, which hits over that. And then, of course, Coral Assault by himself gets to 15k again, and he becomes a 24k attacker. And this is not counting any triggers. So if you got any triggers, they're bigger. And, of course, if they were criticals, they're critical at that point. And then if they're not dead, then at this point, you can do Nerissa Skull, go into Soul, draw another card, then Coral Assault, and draw another card. And you did that twin drive too. So you got 4 new cards on top of that, and now you got 4 cards on the board in this case. And that's it. So honestly, it synergizes really well. So that's why I wanted to show off. And let's just go into the stride zone. So into the G zone, we have only 9 G units. So let me explain. So because the Legion turn and the grade 3 Revonn turn are actually pretty solid, and using cards like Galeas, sometimes they don't play synergetically as much with the strides. Honestly, I feel myself going back to Valeos if I did stride than Alexandros or even Lambros. And honestly, so I built more utility. I built this G zone with both the units and the G guards to become more utility based at that point. Because the main deck itself is the main core, the G zone is basically extra on top of it. And so Valeos is the one basically on attack, Counterblast, flip a card generically, and then for every card face up on the G zone, you can call 2 cards for each of them and draw for each of those cards. And then if you have 2 or more face up, the opponent becomes 11k locked. Honestly, I go into this card because it's a stride, and at the same time, it helps build advantage in both field and hand presence. So he's very easy to work with, and he doesn't do any restand shenanigans that can contradict with a card like Galeas or Tidal Assault, because we are playing the V title. So Alexandros doesn't shine as much, but it is an option. And so when he's second or third, Counterblast 1, flip anything, restand 2 units, give him plus 5k for each face up in the G zone. So he's worth still playing 1 or 2 copies, definitely recommend that. And then of course you have your fallback with Lambros. He's free, since you have an Excel circle, it's easily to achieve that 4 attack basically and restand 2 of your units. And then if you have 2 face-up cards, they get 10k. So that helps in that regard. And then because we're playing cards like V-Title and some cards that just work with the Vanguard being like the last attack, Wailing Thoughtless actually is kind of relevant. So if he's procced, you can use both his skills to either retire cards on the opponent's board or even have that guard restriction. So that way it makes it a little harder for your opponent to guard unless they have the PG draw or the heal trigger. So yeah. But it's there for retirement purposes and if it just makes sense. Megiddo too. Honestly, if Megiddo's easier if you have the Revonn and you got the copy of the Revonn from Baragios, but it is an option. So I just have it there. That's really what that is. So let's go into the G guards now. Onto the G guards. Now, this is a heavy G guard count that I've ever done before. Like I said, we are playing 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. Oh yeah, 8 G guards. Never mind, not 9. I miscounted. So it's an 8-8 split, and honestly, because you're doing the Legion and the Revonn turns, you're more likely to get a heal, and so being able to flexible to 1 into G-Guard is actually more crucial. And then you can follow it with a Stride or Legion turn or just do a scaled up Revonn turn. Depending on what cards you have, it really dictates your turn, which I kind of don't like, but then at the same time, they still complement each other, so it works out, especially if your opponent's at high damage like 4 or 5. It still pans out pretty effectively, actually. So Ionis is basically the G flip guard, and your opponent, I mean not your opponent, you get basically your regards resist, and they cannot be hit by battle, so it saves them all. And then of course you get plus 5, so it can be your biggest shield if you have a big field. Gafila is there for counter charging, and of course the second and third wave plus 5 hit shield as well. Dismal is really that if you do first G guard and you need to protect the unit, Dismal's there. So I added a second one, just be able to protect maybe like a Galeas or a Tidal Assault, for example. And then Rectum is there for like discard fodder, and then of course you have Ice Barrier Dragon, which is your big shield for first, and then 4 for more, plus 10k. And so really again, the G zone is more utility based, so it's a split of 8-8, and honestly you got to try it out because in theory it sounds kind of wacky, but once you actually practice playing the deck, you'll find out that it actually makes more sense. So that's it. And that's it for the deck profile, guys. I hope you enjoyed the deck profile. It's actually a really fun deck to play. I've had a blast actually play testing with it, and honestly, I can see tweaking it a little more. I can see some changes between the grade 3s, the grade 2s, and the grade 1 ratio. So feel free to tweak it and let me know if there's any updates on that too. So comment down below, like the video, share, and subscribe. See you, amigos. Bye.